Managing Violence Podcast, Season 6, Episode 9, with Tommy Joe Moore on modern Bartitsu.
What Bartitsu does is essentially bring together fighting sports, but in a way where they haven't over-sportified. You look at Krav Maga, and in Krav Maga, you've got boxing. But the boxing that you've got in Krav Maga is the boxing of the 1940s to 1960s. It's gloved. In Bartitsu boxing, we're not too far out of the bare-knuckle era. There's still bare-knuckle around. So the boxing you see in Bartitsu is designed for bare-knuckle striking. If you're going to box, you're going to box in a bare-knuckle way.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of the Managing Violence Podcast. So glad you're joining us, whether you're a long-term listener, a returning subscriber, or someone who's just found us thanks to the Jeff Thompson episode last week. We're so happy to have you here. It means a lot to have you all tuning in to broaden your horizons when it comes to violence management and demystifying a taboo topic that I'm sure you'll all agree is more important than we give it credit for. Before we get started, I need to give a big shout out to our sponsor, Australian Warfighters Coffee. Great coffee, but also support Australian veterans in returning to the workforce after their service. Thank you very much, AustralianWarfighters.com, for excellent coffee and merch. Make sure you support them, for they support us. Also, a big shout out to our new Patreon contributors, Chrissy Weeks, Dan Lucy, and former guest Ellis Amder has signed up to participate in the Tribal Council and Tribal Elders. Thank you, gentlemen, for your support. It is the support from our Patreon that keeps this show going, helps it pay the bills, and really makes it sustainable. So thank you very much to all of you. Now, my guest for today is Tommy Joe Moore. Tommy Joe Moore is certainly not as well known as Jeff Thompson, but Tommy's got a really interesting story growing up boxing and doing judo, and then discovered the art of Bartitsu. If you don't know what Bartitsu is, it's an English self-defense system that was founded in the late 1800s, and we'll go into that history in great depth, but it is the martial art of Sherlock Holmes, and it wasn't in existence for long, but it's been revitalized in recent decades, and we go into that story with Tommy Joe Moore. It's a really fascinating conversation. I really enjoyed spending time with Tommy, and I hope you'll enjoy the conversation as well. So without further ado, here is Tommy Joe Moore. I'm joined here on the Managing Violence Podcast by Tommy Joe Moore. Tommy, thanks for joining us.
Not a problem at all. Good to meet you, mate.
Mate, for anyone who may be watching this video eventually, you'll notice that Tommy's ginger beard rivals my ginger beard, which is quite refreshing for me. I don't feel quite as much ginger shame as I normally do. Thanks for making me feel comfortable.
Eventually there'll be a ginger quickening. It'll be like Highlander. All the ginger beards will have to fight until there is just one giant ginger beard.
Yeah, well, yeah. I'm not a full-blown ginger, so I'm not sure if I'm going extinct or if it's just you guys. But anyway, mate, for those that don't know anything about you, you've been around on social media. You're part of a lot of different groups. You've just released a book, and there's another one coming out. We'll get to that. But let's start at the beginning. What's your story? How did you get into martial arts, self-defense, violence management, combatives?
So, I mean, we can pick up on the last thread. Ginger beard means ginger hair. And in the UK, basically, there are two types of ginger. There are prey ginger and predator ginger. You don't want to be the prey ginger. So, you know, it's one of those things where if you're a ginger freckly man as a young child in the UK, people will try and start fights with you. People will give you a hard time. And to be honest, that's where a lot of this comes from for me. As a very early child, you know, I really enjoyed, you know, like a lot of kids, I really enjoyed Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Power Rangers, stuff like that. You know, that stuff like that kind of violence appeals even to very small children. And you know, I had a bit of problems at school. My mum took me to the leisure centre, and I was doing judo, and boxing, and for me, brilliantly, those two arts are one of the 20% martial arts that aren't entirely rubbish. So I was very, very fortunate that early on, really more by happenstance because of the appropriate timings, I got moved into judo and boxing. And I've been doing those since I was 5 years old. So, and again, those are things that I still compete in today, in training and teach today. So those are two kind of fundamental, foundational arts for me. And that helped get me the confidence I needed, the fitness I needed. And they've really grown up with me. And what I've needed from them over the years, I've managed to take away. In my teen years, I started to experiment more with things like Muay Thai. So I trained with Bob Spoor, Eddie Quinn, who you probably know, probably a lot of your audience members will know. So Eddie Quinn was my Thai boxing instructor. He's the loveliest man. He used to pick me up from the car park. So he picked me up. My mum used to pull me in at a pub. Eddie Quinn would pick me up in the car, go teach me Thai boxing for an hour and drop me back. Lovely, lovely man. So I was fortunate that where I'm from, Birmingham in the Midlands in the UK, has got a really good, healthy, vibrant martial arts scene with lots of people that are very, very well known. Eddie Quinn being one of them. So Thai boxing, Jeet Kune Do with a man called Nigel Trotman. And again, very good, very practical, ex-Savat British champion, really, really good guy. So I had access growing up to all these different arts. I always stuck with boxing and judo because I like hurting people and getting hurt. The visceral feedback for that for me. And then I moved into things like JKD, Eskrima, Muay Thai, and essentially added things to the scene. And I've always been a proliferate cross trainer. And I've always been fortunate that a lot of the people that have taught me have been very pro that too. So, a lot of the guys that have taught me, Eddie Quinn, for example, he's got his approach self-protection method. He teaches Muay Thai and he's a Salat guru. So he's got three very distinct, one more martial arty, one more martial sporty, one more self-protection-y kind of vibes to him. And there's a lot of instructors where I'm from and near me when I was growing up that have that kind of three-part skill set. And that's always stayed with me. If you want to be a holistic martial artist, for me anyway, you need the self-protection skills, you need the attributes at least of the martial sports, and I think you do need a bit of that rounding of the martial art too. I know that they get a bit of slack really for wearing pajamas and belts, but there is a lot of inherent value in martial arts too. So I've always had those three, and I've constantly gone on to experiment. I boxed a lot as an amateur and fought a lot as an amateur in judo all around the country, in university leagues, and so on and so on and so on from there. When it comes to reality-based self-defense stuff, so I did work some doors at university and past that, but to be honest, I was a nice doorman. I didn't really get into fights because I'm a nice guy. And I like to think that I was relatively eloquent and bantery enough to get my way through. So, a lot of people that teach, they're like, I had a fight 10 times a night when I was on the door. Yeah, I worked doors for 4 years, didn't really have any fights. I was just nice and ushered out stupid drunks. It was lovely. If anything, what it does, it gets you very good at your verbal self-defense. If you've got a good chat game, people tend to leave you be. If you can make people laugh and convince them to go have a kebab instead of pull out a Stanley knife and stab you, that's a win in my book. So again, while I was exposed to those things, a lot of the experience from that particular aspect of my life was more about verbal skills, how to be a nice guy in the face of severe idiocy. And I think there's a lot to be said in self-defense about the suffering of fools. If you can suffer fools easily, you can avoid most terrible things happening to you. If you can manage that, keep yourself safe, but suffer idiots gladly. That's an unspoken skill set, which I think is an important one. And I've gone on to teach and do lots and lots of things and fill my game as I see fit. I'm starting to get on the older spectrum of competitive boxing. So I've got a unlicensed professional bout at the end of November against a man nearly half my age who I'm going to fight. I've probably got a couple more good hard boxing matches in me, but in the same token, I'm also experimenting in areas like firearms. So I'm training with a guy called Brett McKenzie, ex-British Forces, and he essentially is teaching weapons handling, combative shooting, all those different elements, because I felt that there's a gap in my game. I can grapple, I can strike, I've got the reality-based awareness. I can use melee weapons. What I didn't have was firearms. So I go through and I self-analyze and I pick different things up. But as you might know, I run a club now in a very niche martial art called Bartitsu, which is essentially my distillation of my skills and the things I've come across through the lens of that particular art.
Yeah, fantastic. Man, what a fantastic base to have. I mean, judo and boxing is pretty much, if you're going to pick any two arts to sort of just start someone off in to get basic skills, that's some incredible attribute generation there with the footwork and the distance and the timing and the head movement and the ability to control someone on the both standing in a clinch and also on the ground. I mean, that's a really fantastic base to work from. And I mean, I think everything else kind of ties back in. I mean, if you can box, I mean, yeah, maybe kicking takes a little bit of adaptation, but I mean, from my experience, if you've got hands, then it's not hard to filter in sticks and knives and melee weapons, as you said. And if you can do judo, then you can wrestle and you can do jiu-jitsu, and yeah, you've got a reference point. It's a really good base to start from.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always of the opinion there's no such thing as martial arts. There's martial archetypes. So there's wrestly ones, there's striky ones, there's stabby ones, there's bludgeony ones, and there's shooty ones, and they're all just a different flavour of that. You know, the rest is just nationalism and rules and some old man's opinion. But in reality, there's just martial archetypes. In the same way that if you're very good at a screamer, you can still batter someone with a wrench. You've still got all the skills necessary to use that wrench as you would a stick, as you would a machete. So I'm very much so, if you get good at one martial archetype in that skill set, if you're good at Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, you can still go to a judo club and you won't look a fool. If you can wrestle, you can still go to a judo club and you'll do well, because it's all just that grappling archetype or that striking archetype. It's all the same.
Yeah, I felt the same thing when I was competing a lot in different grappling sports. I was never content just to do judo. I mean, judo was my base, but I competed in wrestling and belt wrestling and karash and sumo and sambo and Scottish backhold, even some Cornish wrestling. Like I've done like pretty much everything I get my hands on, because to me it's like the act is to wrestle, and then everything else is just kind of a wrestling game. You throw a different set of rules, different objectives, and you have fun. It becomes a game. So I fully agree with you there. I think I like that idea of martial archetypes. So I might steal that.
You go for it, buddy.
Tommy, let's talk about Bartitsu, because this is something that we've never talked about before on the podcast, which is kind of cool, because after 60 odd episodes, we've covered a lot of stuff, but I don't think anyone's ever brought up Bartitsu before. Now, it's an art that I have dabbled with. When I say dabbled with, I mean I've researched it via Google and the occasional book that I've managed to find over the years, but I don't know a huge amount about it. But it's always been something that's intrigued me. So before I try and give my amateur version, what's the history of Bartitsu? Where did it come from?
Okay, so a potted history of Bartitsu. So in the late 1800s, there's this British railway engineer called Edward William Barton Wright. And by all accounts, and they are self-proclaimed accounts, so you got to take it with a bit of a pinch of salt, he was already a decent boxer, decent with a knife. He was already a decent rough and tumble fightery type bloke, but he doesn't go into too much detail about that. But what we do know is he goes to Japan as this railway engineer, and he studies traditional jiu-jitsu for about 2.5 years. And and by traditional jiu-jitsu, we are talking traditional, probably kata-based jiu-jitsu. So we're talking kind of more atemiwaza, more striking techniques than probably modern viewers or listeners would be aware of. There's a lot more strike to throw than there would be in, say, modern jiu-jitsu, if people follow that. But he trains in jiu-jitsu and he comes back to London, and he notices that London's in a kind of sense of social panic, moral decay. So the old class boundaries, the things that might have kept a gentleman safe 50 years ago, no longer apply. So it's very, if you imagine, if you work in a London Docklands and you're a tough, hard, fit bloke, and someone comes past with a fancy watch, a fancy cane, and a fancy hat, and you can sell that, and suddenly you realise that you can just beat him up and take it, and there's nothing his posh self can do about it. People start to realise that class is fluid, and that you can attack upper classes, and you can get away with it. There's a sense of moral panic. We get a big rise in the press at the time. So it's not that there's really more crime, but there's more reporting of crime. So, a gentleman will open his papers, and we all like to be outraged, and there'll be lots of stories designed to trigger upper class gentry of London. Lord Farquhar was robbed and beaten on his way back from the opera. This is scandal, this is outrage, this doesn't happen. So a lot of the middle and upper classes start to panic about their own self-protection, their own personal safety, because they've got something to lose. They've got wealth in a city that was very, very poor. Victorian Edwardian London, very poor.
And I guess a undeveloped police force as well at that time.
Undeveloped police force. The police force really, as it is today, is more about bringing people to justice than the prevention of crime. They can't be everywhere, so it's more about mopping it up afterwards. It's very much the same for historical police forces. So Barton Wright notices that there are wealthy people with time and money is important, that are worried about being robbed, beaten, attacked, or otherwise harassed. And so he decides in a very wealthy part of London to set up this club. And it's a big subterranean club, all kind of white tile, beautiful. And what he does is he brings together a series of martial arts instructors that match his personal vision for self-protection in London for that class, that type of people. And he brings together instructors such as Pierre Vigny, who was a Swiss military officer, a savate. If people don't know what savate is, it's essentially a French kickboxing system. He's also a cane fighter, so he was very proficient in the use of cane for self-defense. You've got Armand Chapillon, was a Swiss wrestler, so Swiss folk wrestling styles, but he was also a good Greco-Roman wrestler. People that wrestled at that time just wrestled for the rule set. They weren't just a wrestler of a type. They'll go on show. As soon as the curtain lifts, we're doing Cornish wrestling. We're doing Swiss wrestling. Doesn't really matter. It's wrestling. So he's got all these different instructors, and he's got Yuki Otani and Uyaneshi and a range of Japanese jujitsukas as well, which are essentially on tour showing off how bright, shiny, modern, and westernized Japan is. They're part of a big cultural push to say, we're rapidly modernized, we're a proper country, we're a serious country. Here are some of our sporting ambassadors. So at this club in London, you've got one of the world's best saboteurs and cane fighters. You've got some of the world's best wrestlers and jujitsukas. And you've got Barton Wright, whose entire job really is not as good as any of the other instructors, is once you've got proficiency in those different arts, his job is essentially to pull that together into something useful, a modern self-defense syllabus. And again, this is very much a reality-based system because his job is to get you ready to keep yourself safe on the streets of Victorian Edwardian London. He can only do that once you've acquired the base skill sets in wrestling, in boxing. An important omission, I would say, is that it's already expected of the time for a sporting gentleman to be pretty decent at boxing. So whilst boxing was taught at the Bartitsu Club, it's already an expectation, really, as a kind of a sporting endeavour that a man should be able to box or have some knowledge of boxing. So Barton Wright doesn't really delve too much into the boxing side of it because it's somewhat unnecessary, really. And the big exotic selling feature is the jiu-jitsu. That's the new thing for the people of London. That's the new shiny toy in the box. So that's what he uses to draw attention to. But essentially, Barton Wright develops a holistic syllabus to get people aware in each of the martial archetypes, bring that together personally to match how they should keep themselves safe. And it's very much a personal, curated system because these are high wealth audiences. So they're coming to get essentially pretty direct tuition. How could that person as a 5'2", lighter man defend himself, or how could that 6 foot kind of strapping muscular gentleman defend himself? That will really depend on what Barton Wright brings to the fore for you. So he runs this club for 2 years, and as with all things, people start to realize that because Barton Wright isn't the best at any of those areas, they splinter off. So a lot of people run off and just do jiu-jitsu because you wear a nice uniform, you speak a different language, and I'm going to do jiu-jitsu with the best guys. Again, these are wealthy people with time and taste. So why would I do jiu-jitsu with Barton that's only done it for 2 years when I could do it with these jazzy Japanese guys that know their business? So it starts to splinter, and essentially the club dissolves in under 2 years. And all that we've got remaining of that club are essentially magazine articles, a couple of third-hand accounts, newspaper clippings, and what we call the antagonistics, so what other instructors of the time said about it or what they were teaching. But essentially, Bartitsu is one of the first systems in the world that uses predominantly martial sports, boxing, savate, judo, wrestling, to pull together into a holistic self-defense system in the same way that, Krav Maga would do many, many, many years later. You can almost see it like a proto Krav Maga or Defender, the Fairburn combative systems. It's combatives before that was even conceived of as a thing.
It's really interesting. Sorry to pause you there. It's really interesting that it was kind of a melting pot, but it sounds like the incentive was more financial than it was about martial truth. I mean, you say Bruce Lee kind of did the same thing with his Jeet Kune Do, but for him it was about an exploration of what's the best fighting system. Where it sounds like for Barton Wright, it was about how do I give these wealthy people what they need.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, Barton Wright was a businessman, and not a very good businessman. But after Bartitsu folded, he went into a lot of other kind of fields of quack medicine. So he went into like electrotherapies and other dangerous Victorian Edwardian therapies. So really, Bartitsu was effective by mistake, in that, by happens, he must have had a good sound martial mind, because he's not an idiot. He's come back and he's seen the social scene. People are afraid. They don't feel safe. What are they afraid of? And they're afraid of gangs, groups of people that no longer respect the social order. So he understands that there are habitual acts of physical violence that are happening to people, and they're afraid of it. And he then looks at essentially some very effective arts to do it. These are very, very effective systems. Boxing is an effective system. Judo is an effective system. Savate is an effective system. It works. You kick each other in the liver long enough, it hurts. These guys. So he's got a sound martial vision. I would say that one of the reasons for his downfall was his business acumen. But I would say that nothing has changed. If you look at some of the big combatives franchises that have come and gone over the past 30 years, where people invent a brand name and then it explodes and then it dies. To name drop, Kisi Fighting Method. That goes boom, everybody loves it. Then it goes whoosh, disappears into a vacuum. Now people are trying to revive it again, but you get these boom and busts when people start to franchise and charge and affiliate programs and all this stuff. The same thing happened to Barton Wright. Shows that people never learn. People, when you rely on your martial arts to do business, the business takes over your martial arts, and that is as true then as it is today.
Yeah.
But
what's the sorry? So I was just going to ask you about the Sherlock Holmes connection.
So Sherlock Holmes. So obviously, Barton Wright, being a somewhat savvy businessman, gets a ton of media about Bartitsu. He gets it in the papers and in the magazines, and because it's for a wealthier demographic, that's the literati. Those are the people that are reading the magazines and the newspapers. So it has a bit of a media boom, and he's doing the show hall circuit as well. So if audiences don't know, you would take wrestling, boxing, fencing, and you take it to theatres and you'd go watch it as a piece, show hall. Sometimes people from the audience might get involved. Sometimes that'd be real, sometimes that'd be fake, but that was a piece of entertainment. So you'd go promo yourself on the road around these different show halls and music venues and what have you. So it gets a big buzz. And obviously Arthur Conan Doyle, the writer of Sherlock Holmes, he's already written Sherlock Holmes to be a proficient boxer and a proficient single stick player using a stick for fencing. So Sherlock Holmes is already pretty hard to begin with in the books. And then obviously as Bartitsu makes a scene in the same circle as Conan Doyle, he figures out, well, why couldn't Sherlock Holmes have studied Bartitsu? So he writes it in his book, and when Sherlock Holmes finally defeats Moriarty, he uses a Bartitsu hold or a Bartitsu throw to trip him over and throw him over the waterfall. That's what he does. That's his kind of epic fighting finale. And he's found an art that's in the press to do that. He misspells it, so he calls it Bartitsu. People misspell it now. I get all sorts. But people just love that I've got the word tits in the art, to be honest. So, I mean, that's a big deal for a lot of people.
I feel like you should just run with Bartitsu.
Yeah, I should run with Bartitsu. So it features in Sherlock Holmes' book, and it's only from that really it survives in any form of consciousness. It's lucky that it's a significant piece because it's how he defeats Moriarty. So it's anyone that's interested in Sherlock Holmes will have read that word, and so it survives. But yeah, essentially that's the connection. And as historical European martial arts started to grow and become popular again, people started to pick up, well, what is this Bartitsu thing? And then they'd pull out the articles and the magazines and the other writings at the time. And essentially it's a reconstructed system. It's a reconstructed system like all historical European martial arts.
Yeah, that's really fascinating to me because, I mean, growing up in the Asian martial arts, and in particular Japanese martial arts, everything's quite well documented, whether it be historically or whether it be through the transmission of kata or however the art has been passed down. But there's very little mystery around the evolution of the Japanese arts, to use but one example. But with Bartitsu, when I first came across it, it was maybe the early 2000s, I think.
Yeah.
Maybe more towards 2010, somewhere along there. And I remember being fascinated by this idea, and I tried to Google it as hard as I could, and there was very little information. And there's actually a lot more information now than there was 10 years ago. But as you say, it was like historical European martial arts, where people are trying to almost reconstruct the lost scrolls into something that makes sense. And as you say, I mean, if it wasn't for that inclusion in the Sherlock Holmes novels, then does anyone even remember it? I actually had no idea that he was only teaching for 2 years. That's saying that 120 years later, we're talking about something he did for 2 years with no real success.
Yeah, absolutely. Because again, it's he came across accidental genius. In reality, he beat Jeet Kune Do, Defendu, and Krav Maga to the punch. Many years before they even conceptualized it. But you look through any kind of what we call the antagonistics, so the training manuals of the time of Bartitsu, and you'll see techniques that would be extremely familiar to anyone picking up a martial arts book today. You got simultaneous blocking and hitting, cramps, chokes, leg locks, everything you can possibly do to a human to hurt them is in those books and in those guides as it would be today. So he's an accidental genius. He died a pauper, so he died a poor man's in a poor man's grave. So somewhat unmarked grave. But yeah, he was the first person to realize that it's marketable and effective. And I suppose that's it's a testament to his legacy that not much has changed since he came up with that particular notion or idea.
Yeah, and it's also interesting, and I think he probably deserves some credit for the coaching acumen to not just say, well, look, these people don't know any better, so I'm just going to pick a handful of techniques that I know from boxing and a handful of techniques I know from jiu-jitsu, and I'm going to package it up and teach it all myself. He actually brought in experts that are subject matter experts in each different field, which, like that, to me, that resonates with me with the evolution of mixed martial arts. And I wouldn't even say early mixed martial arts, but we didn't see true connections of subject matter experts until the late 90s, early 2000s, where you suddenly started getting a champion jiu-jitsu guy and a champion Muay Thai guy and a champion wrestler coming together to pool resources. And then the key component being the head coach who combines everything. And as you described, Barton right there, I couldn't help but think of a Greg Jackson. He's
Greg Jackson in tweed.
Yeah, exactly. Except Greg Jackson's got someone else running his business, which good for him. That's really fascinating. I think that probably deserves more credit than what we give it, because it's not a conventional approach back then. Anyone who was bringing back secrets from the East, and there was a handful of people that were bringing back judo or jiu-jitsu from Japan as Japan was starting to open up, but they're coming back with their 1 year of study and their teaching, not bringing in experts.
Yeah, and in fairness, a lot of people would judge the fact that Barton Wright only spent 2 years in Japan. There are other people that are coming back from Japan at a similar time that have spent significantly longer. But I would wager that he's taken from that what he needed to. If his focus, he didn't come back to teach Koryu Jiu-Jitsu. He came back to teach Bartitsu, his particular slice of it, and obviously for him, he feels like he had enough jitsu in the tank to teach that adequately. And I would imagine that training in Japan at that time, it's not like he's going to a leisure center once a week on a Sunday. I imagine he would have been doing significant prolonged training. That would have been, I imagine, a daily occurrence for him. But it's groundbreaking that he brings in people better than himself. I think that's, while he was a businessman and he had a big ego, it takes balls to bring in people that are better than you in pretty much every area to come coach in your club. Not many coaches today would countenance that. Big MMA stables would, but many coaches are very, very wary of competition.
It probably would have worked out better for him if he was in an era of non-compete clauses, so that his instructors didn't take his students from him. But look, I find it really interesting that Bartitsu it's lumped in with historical European martial arts, or HEMA, and I think it's very easy to look at the old manuals and go, oh, it's kind of just cosplay. It's not reality. But we're judging it based upon a modern standard. We're not judging it based upon what else was available at the time. And as you said, I mean, other than a bit of sporting boxing, there wasn't much else around. So to have a system of training that was based around self-defense scenarios, which is what all the training from what I've seen is, it's counters to grabs, counters to strikes, it's counters to muggings and abductions and things along those lines. I mean, that's the reality of the time.
Yeah, it's a universal reality. It's group attacks. All the things that could happen. Every misfortune that could be happening to a human today was happening in 1800s London. There's a mugging today is the same as a mugging of yesteryear, only in a slightly funny Cockney accent. It's the same. It's the exact same thing. And you look at those books, and how it's written and how people dress, and that makes people judge it. But you take a boxer, you take someone like John Sullivan, and you say, do you think you could beat John Sullivan? Not many people today could beat John Sullivan. You wouldn't laugh at it just because they dress in a weird way and the sports wear was different. These are hard men fighting in hard times, in harder times than what we fight today. You're doing 12 rounds in 10-ounce gloves is a luxury compared to some of the boxers of the Bartitsu era.
Fighting for 3 days straight.
I think what doesn't help is HEMA itself. So I'll be very frank in that a lot of people that study historical European martial arts or studied were typically, on the less athletic end of the spectrum. So that there are people, nerds that are into their history and they're into the dress-up stuff. And a lot of people that started digging out weren't necessarily accomplished either reality-based self-defense instructors or combat sports guys. They were just normal people that liked history, picking up a book and giving it a go. And that is laudable, to give things a go. But I think that coloured the entire scene. But a bit like historical European martial arts was once a lot of weirdos with wooden broom handles hitting each other. Now it's a full contact, vibrant sport where people are, athleticism, skill, sparring, fighting. There's more sparring and fighting going on in a HEMA club than most Filipino martial arts club. I absolutely guarantee it. So they're starting to become what they should have been. Obviously, there is always an argument for how much sportification takes you away from the initial objective. Using a sword isn't a sport; it's an art. It's something to keep yourself safe. But yeah, I think as HEMA evolved, so too did Bartitsu. And I came at it to give my own take. There's not many other Bartitsu instructors in the world, and there are very few that are of my type of background, so a more combat sports and reality-based self-defense background. Not many people have that. And I thought, that's what Bartitsu is made from. So I wanted to give it a crack. I wanted to kind of share that with the world through my lens as well. So obviously I'm teaching historical material and adding my own material too, because there are gaps. But in reality, each Bartitsu instructor's got their own different take on it. They're all, we could all be horribly wrong and it could be very, very different. But, my club has my take and that's what I share with people. And mine's probably a bit more of a fighty, aggressive version than what others might see out there.
Yeah, that's, I love everything about it because to me it ticks boxes. I want something to be practical, but I also like a little bit of culture and a little bit of the cultural immersion. And obviously the timing's really nice with Peaky Blinders being really really popular. And I think there's a romanticism as well of the bygone era, and I think there's also probably a revised nationalism is too loaded of a term, but I think people want to know about their heritage. People from the West want to know, well, what's our Western martial art? Why are we spending so much time studying martial arts from other cultures? Surely we had our own, and I think there's a really nice sort of cultural journey there as well. One of the things that I like about Bartitsu, and to be honest, I didn't really notice until I started looking through some of your material, was the range of weaponry that was taught, or at least the range of weaponry that you teach as part of your Bartitsu. Do you want to go into that a little bit?
Yeah, so again, for me, it's about martial archetypes. So I'm teaching Bartitsu, and I'm teaching Bartitsu as it was taught then, in that people would be attacked with a certain range of weapons. So I look at what weapons were popular in that time. So you're looking at cudgels and blackjacks and knuckle dusters and all these different street weapons. And you need awareness and proficiency in using them and not being hit by them for Bartitsu to work. Because if you're teaching authentic Bartitsu, those gang of sailors on the dock, they're not just going to attack you with polite words, they're going to attack you with weapons. And so for me, again, as soon as you understand the weapon archetype, for example, I'll go to my bookshelf. Right. There we go. So you take basic things, like if you understand a stick, you understand a truncheon. You understand boxing, you understand a knuckle duster. You understand short sticks, you understand saps and blackjacks. So for me, I bring these things into my training because if I'm trying to teach relatively authentic Bartitsu, the people, I'm always assuming there are more than one and they're always armed. And you'd be foolish if you didn't assume that. I can't imagine for one moment Barton Wright, being the sensible man that he is, I imagine he would have considered the notion that I'm defending myself against multiple weapons. So I teach based on the weapons that you face. And I'm very, very, very adamant that if you're teaching someone to defend themselves against a weapon, you need to teach them how to use that weapon too. So if I manage to take something like this off a person, there's no point me chucking it away. I need to know how it works. How do I use it? What makes it special? So again, I look at the truncheon manuals of the time, the police manuals, how these are used, and I teach it. So I teach how to get them off people, and I teach people how to batter other people with them. And that, that's an important part of my take on Bartitsu. Proficiency with the weapons that you're likely to face. And that matches my modern training. As I mentioned, I noticed there's a gap in my firearms knowledge. If I'm going to be attacked by a firearm, odds are, knowing the world as it is today, it's probably going to be one of the AK family of firearms. So I'm getting myself proficient in how they work. Getting things off people is one thing, and that's a pretty universal skill if you can disarm. But you've got to be able to use those things too. Otherwise you've just got a big lump of wood and metal. You can batter people with it, but you should know how to use things you should take off people. So for Bartitsu, what we have documented from Barton Wright is the use of the cane, the fighting cane. Then what we've got is from other sources of the same time, uses of the knife, from Italian and Spanish sources, uses of the truncheon. You build up your skill sets in how people use weapons at that time. And it's essentially how people use weapons today. Humans are really kind of, we are really intuitive creatures. How we pick up and use a truncheon today is the same as we would have picked it up and used it 100 years ago as 1,000 years ago. It's the same thing. But it's important to me in my version of Bartitsu, and especially because I like to give it a reality-based edge, that there are always weapons and there is always more than one.
Yeah. You know what? The more I think about it, I think Bartitsu has an enormous gap that it fills really nicely. And that I look at some of the other, so the arts that are most recommended for self-defense. If we're talking about general population recommendations, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is probably the number one art that gets recommended as far as I see online, and that's because obviously with the explosion of the UFC and BJJ in the 90s and 2000s and onwards, it was exposed to a large number of people. And I think traditional Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I've had the great fortune to train with people like Rickson Gracie who really maintain the traditional approach, but it evolved for a challenge match culture. It didn't evolve for a group attack or a mugging or an attack on a gentry trying to steal their wallet. Like it evolved for an ego fight, a match fight. Maybe not with many rules, but still one-on-one with some sort of honor code. And then you've got Krav Maga is probably the other most recommended art, of which I'm also an instructor. But Krav Maga evolved for the military. It evolved for war zone and active terror targets and so on. It wasn't again for your gentry, And I think you've got two ends of the spectrum. Whereas Krav Maga is in its original form is very much about fighting to the death, and to hell with the consequences, because it's better than being blown up, or taken to an intern camp. But if you look at what modern people are facing now, we need to be aware of the lower level predatory violence, where it's more about a show of force and intimidation and theft and coercion and potentially abduction. But also keeping in mind the legal frameworks in which we live, and that killing someone and ripping out their heart and showing it to them as they die may not look good on CCTV. So I do think there's a gap for us like Bartitsu that have really evolved for a society that is actually closer to what most of us live in now than those other two arts.
Exactly, and I always think you need to be ready for, especially as a man. I think there are different realities for men and women in self-defense. And men, especially younger men, are much more likely to be exposed also to ritualized violence. So, what are you looking at in a pub? And there are limits to how you can fight in that particular paradigm. There is the assault level of violence where I don't see it coming clubbed around the back of the head and beaten and robbed, and you need to be ready for that. But there's also, especially as a man, you also need to be ready for that almost ritualized sense of violence. And that's where, your sporting arts, like your Brazilian jiu-jitsu, your boxing, your judo, is perfect, because they are supercharged, super weaponized ways to fight one other human being in a relatively codified way. The variables are still always there, but there's a relatively codified sense of violence for men. So yeah, I think it's a fascinating. I think what Bartitsu does is essentially bring together fighting sports, but in a way where they haven't over-sportified. You look at Krav Maga, and in Krav Maga, you've got boxing, but the boxing that you've got in Krav Maga is the boxing of the 1940s to 1960s. It's gloved. So you see people in Krav Maga books, and they're boxing away at people. In Bartitsu boxing, we're not too far out of the bare-knuckle era. There's still bare-knuckle around. So the boxing you see in Bartitsu is designed for bare-knuckle striking. It's vertical fists. It's a lot more cognizant of, if you're going to box, you're going to box in a bare-knuckle way. I think a lot of the modern arts that have aggregated, like Krav Maga, they're having people box in a way that matches gloved arts, just without the gloves off. And that has its own inherent risks and dangers. In the same way, the early judo that would have been taught at the Bartitsu Club is a lot more weaponized, I would say, than the modern randori judo of today. You've got the judo, which is only just splintered from jiu-jitsu. It's still got that combative edge. It's got the newaza, it's got the groundwork, but it's still a fighty judo. And I think that's where Bartitsu has really good gains, in that the sporting arts it's made up from have that testing sporting mentality without the historical baggage, but they've also got very, very, very close links to arts that, there are no gloves. We aren't just staying on the ground. I'm not just going to do osikomi. I'm not just going to cover you and get my points as I lay on top of you. The sporting rule sets that are from the Bartitsu era are a lot more combative, I think, than the sporting arts that go into things like modern day Krav Maga, or kapap, or other other derivatives of modern kind of self-defense.
I'd actually really like to drill down a little bit on the self-defense application for boxing, because I know you're a lifelong boxer, and you just raised a really good point about bare knuckle versus gloved boxing. And I mean, look, if anyone wants to go learn boxing now, they are going to learn gloved boxing. They're going to be learning headgear, probably 12 to 16 ounce gloves. I mean, for training purposes. they're going to be learning something that's very different to the type of boxing that they would have learned if they wanted to go looking for boxing in the late 1800s. And as someone I know as a student of the game and teaching with a self-defense influence, do you want to cover off on some of the main points you consider when it comes to punching for self-defense?
So punching for self-defense. One of the main points, people have been bare knuckle boxing for hundreds and hundreds of years, and universally, to a man, people that do this for a living at that time, always, always, always vertical fist. You get lots of arguments for either or, but if every single bare knuckle boxing professional for 400 years tells you to punch this way, and they've been doing it and they're fighting 100, 150 times in their career, there's something to it. So there is good scientific validity for a vertical fist. One of the best tests I show people is that when you do a horizontal fist and you punch up a flattish surface, these little knuckles here always hit before the big knuckles, because most human fists are somewhat slanted. Okay, so you always hit with these rubbish knuckles first, and these bend and they break and they snap and they do terrible, terrible things. You change that to a vertical fist every time a big chunky knuckle touches that hand first. So your surety of hitting with a proper knuckle is guaranteed. You've got really good skeletal alignment. Another thing I quite like is how it changes your shoulder. If I do a horizontal fist here, my shoulder stays relatively low, otherwise it's unnatural. Soon as I change it here, my shoulder raises to cover my chin. The hand in the same place, but I get better protection of my jaw. So I get the knuckles on target a lot more often, and knuckle discipline is really important in bare knuckle boxing. It's a bit like blade discipline. If you're too used to playing with foam knives, you hit people with all manner of the knife, bits that wouldn't really cut. It's the same when you put on gloves. You can hit someone with anywhere on the glove, and it still counts as a point. It can still hurt. When you're boxing bare knuckle, you need good knuckle discipline. You need to know where your knuckles are and where you're hitting. But I'd say vertical fist means you always hit with a good, decent knuckle. It raises the shoulder somewhat, and it means you get a lot of bare knuckle boxing which hits in a kind of slight supination like so. And that's really good at getting behind the ear, into the throat, into the liver. That turn here is actually a really good way to get into some nasty, nasty spaces. Also what you get is, I've stolen the term from karate, but I like it, is sticky hitting. So I think it's called machimi in karate. But essentially, when we hit in boxing, we get used to a fast percussive hit. We go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. What I like in bare knuckle boxing, and the bare knuckle boxing I teach, is as soon as that hit's on, I'm then moving to the other hit. So it kind of stays a little bit on that target. You're always ploughing forward, because I'm not boxing for rounds. I don't need to go 1, 2, 3, get off. You keep going forward. You keep smashing. So you get a lot more commitment to the blows. If anyone's read, and I really recommend, Jack Dempsey's book on boxing, it teaches people about the art of drop stepping. So it's putting more mass. There's more commitment in bare knuckle boxing. There's probably fewer strikes, but when they land, there's greater commitment, there's greater mass, there's greater stepping in and staying in on that person. But there are lots of things about bare knuckle boxing which make a lot more sense for self-defense striking than gloved boxing. What I get really annoyed at is striking pads and bags with gloves on sounds beautiful, and I think sound is one of the things that ruins it. Right. So when you put your gloves on, you put your nice leather gloves on, and you hit a nice leather bag or mitts, and you go slap, 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 and it makes a really good booming echo, and you feel like Mike Tyson. But it's a complete fiction. It's just leather smacking leather at high speed. I always say one of the first things you need to do is get rid of one of your soft things. Don't hit a soft pad with a soft glove. If you're going to hit the pad's already padded. Use your fist. If the opponent wants to use their hands, you put on a glove. You at the very least, if you're going to wean yourself off, get rid of one of the padded things from the equation. If you're hitting a padded bag, I don't need a padded glove. If I've got a padded glove on, I can hit a harder thing than a padded bag. Those are some elements, but for me, there are lots of aspects about historical bare knuckle boxing which are fundamental to using boxing for self-defense today. I love arts like Krav and Kapap, but what I do see is people have taken modern Western boxing, they know it works, and a lot of the time they throw it in to a reality-based self-defense system without looking at how does boxing work bare knuckle? You get a lot of people, a lot of advocates of palm heel strikes and so on. And you've got those in Bartitsu too, because it's using traditional jiu-jitsu, your chops, your palm heel strikes, all that stuff is in there. But at the end of the day, boxing works. And I feel that the self-defense boxing in Bartitsu, the bare knuckle orientated boxing, is a much better way to keep yourself safe and to cause maximum damage with your hands. And that's why we advocate it. But by the same token, you do need the modern boxing acumen. So you do need to be fit enough. You do need to have that ability to use your body weight and your torque and your speed. There are great things about modern boxing. So I teach both, but when it comes to core Bartitsu curriculum, historical pugilism, bare knuckle boxing is a core part for me.
Yeah, I've always been fascinated by bare knuckle boxing, and I love watching the recent revival of bare knuckle boxing on a professional level, because once we actually start getting some proper boxers involved rather than just retired MMA guys that are looking for one more payday, it'll be really interesting to see how that changes the evolution, the trajectory of the study of boxing again. But I remember a very clear experience I had I think I was probably late teens. I was working out at a PCYC, which is like our youth club, YMCA equivalent. And I was just in the basketball courts, and we had heavy bags set up in the corners. And there was this old Irish guy, probably a pikey guy, I don't know. But he was working the bag over bare knuckle. And I was standing next to him, and I was really intrigued by the way he was punching. And I asked him about it, and he explained to me that he'd always grown up fighting bare knuckle. And he went on a massive rant. I mean, to be honest, he was probably drunk, but he went off on a big rant about how modern boxers don't know how to punch to the body anymore. And he was explaining that when you're punching with knuckles, and he was only a slight guy, so he had kind of small hands, that you can target organs and you can generate. He showed me this corkscrew sort of motion on the punch to send shockwaves into organs and cause disruption of the bodily fluids. And to me, as like a 17-year-old or however old I was, like this was like, wow, I've just found like a drunk Miyagi. I never saw the guy again. He's probably homeless. I don't know, but. It was really interesting to me, and and he was talking about how if you're going to punch the head, you have to hit the chin, because otherwise you're going to break your hand, or the chin or nose. Was what he was saying. But you got to watch out for the teeth. Watch out for the teeth. You got to make sure you hit the chin or the nose only, or slap the ears. And that, to me, like at the time, I'd only ever really played with Western boxing in the modern sense, and it just changed the way I looked at things. And when later on I went and studied in Wing Chun, I saw some of the same principles. And again, it's human biology only punches in certain ways that generate force. But it's something that's always fascinated me.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, with bare knuckle boxing, what you see in, say, the bare knuckle boxing fight leagues at the moment, the guys are still boxing without the gloves on. But whether they realize it or not, the art's changing. So a lot of people now are standing a bit more open-handed. They're parrying in a bit more open-handed way. Their use of clinch work and moving people, what in traditional pugilism we call chancery, being able to hold and hit and hold and manipulate. People are starting just by sheer luck. They're starting to exhibit those techniques because they're starting to realize their work. So whilst people aren't in the bare knuckle scene actively thinking about it, they're manifesting because they work. How people stand, that people in bare knuckle tend to have a slightly more elongated guard. So I can't rely on, say, a tight peekaboo defense. I don't have the leather there. So I might as well have some degree of ability to intercept. The notion of milling. So milling is about having your hands in continual perpetual motion. And you start to see that more. The notion being that you can get from 10 miles an hour to 30 miles an hour faster than 0. So if I'm moving at 10, I can get to 30. If I'm at 0, I'm at a standing start. And you're starting to see that organically manifest itself in modern bare knuckle boxing. And those are all things that we teach in Bartitsu that people were doing hundreds of years ago. So it's exciting to see, and it's ratifying to see, because you're like, it just makes sense. If people are doing it without being taught now, and people did teach it then, there is a strong evidence base to say that this stuff works.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about your book. So you've just released a Bartitsu book. Tell us how that came about.
So basically, I've got it here. Here's the thing. There's the book. I only just realised, I had it pointed out to me, that the Kraken I've got on the front looks like the emblem of the bad people in the recent James Bond films, the Spectre organisation. But you know what? Let's just go with it. So the book,
if you can get Bartitsu into a Bond film, you'll have another renaissance.
There are no modern Bartitsu books. All Bartitsu books at the moment are old photographs, old articles put together in a well-meaning but relatively poorly produced way. You know, they're not made by graphic designers. They're not laid out in a particularly structured way. They are compilations. You know, they are, and that's great. That was great for the early years, and a lot of books about the history of it. And here are some of the original articles, and here are some of the things that other people at the time were doing. But no one had made a modern interpretation of that people could follow. You know, so I made this book because I wanted more Bartitsu clubs to open. So it's not really designed for people that aren't good at martial arts. It's designed for people that can box a bit, kick a bit, wrestle a bit. And if they want to start their own club, they can see the techniques, how they were done at the time, and pick that up and teach it. And you know, so pretty much all of the book is designed as instructive manual. You know, there's hardly any copy. It's all step by step, pretty concise and precise, I hope, instructions on how to do things and why it matters, so people can pick it up. And the book covers boxing, savate, grappling in its various forms, and the use of weapons. You know, it's hard to get it all into one book, and that's why you can beat a man to death with it. It's a chunky old book. It's a self-defense weapon in its own right. You can.
I was going to say, you got some two-handed thrusting techniques you could do with that. Put a man down.
So, you know the old school roll it up and put it in people's throat. You don't need to do that with this. Just bang straight in the throat.
Right up the nose. Change the day.
The book for me, I wanted to get out there. You know, I'm a former teacher, so I was a religious studies teacher, believe it or not. I'm not religious in any way, but I was a religious studies teacher, and I think what you learn being a teacher is it's a wanky word called pedagogy. You learn the best ways to teach people. You know, the best structured way to take people through a program of content. A lot of people that are in martial arts, they don't really get taught how to teach. They go to a club for a number of years, and then they just do what they were taught. So I was quite fortunate. As an ex-teacher, I made the book in a way that matches learning progressions and how things can be done. And I understand it's a book. You know, it's 200 pages, and you could write 200 pages about the use of a jab if you wanted to. But I wanted to get enough material out there that if that drops on any experienced martial artist's doorstep, he could go set up a Bartitsu club and experiment. You know, my club's the Bartitsu Lab. It's about trying it, testing it, give it a go, make it work for you, make it work for your environment, the threats. You know, an American picking up this book, they will need to add different responses to threats of violence than someone in Britain, because, you know, gang violence is different here. The weapons are different here. You know, everywhere in the world has I say everywhere in the world, like Europe has different self-defense concerns to America, as to Australia, as to anywhere. But this book gives people the core fundamentals they need. I don't spend too much time talking about situational awareness, de-escalation, and so on, because there are already billions of really good books on that stuff. The gap was, how do you fight using the skills of that period of time, and how does that apply today? So, you know, I'm not teaching a histography here. I'm saying, if you're going to box, this is a great way to box bare knuckle. This is how I do it. You know, try it out. But because these are from sporting backgrounds, you know these things work. You know, the bare knuckle boxers at the time, that's their job. So when they're telling you to punch this way, it's a professional's considered opinion on why you should punch this way. Not some guy that's done Krav Maga in a leisure centre for 4 years, but a guy that's been punching people in the face since he was 16 in a Welsh coal mine, and he's now 40, he's about to die, and he runs a pub. This is his book. You know, these are important considerations. But I wanted a book that I was proud of, that had enough breadth of material for people to go with. And then, you know, martial arts isn't my business. You know, I have a good job already. So for me, I make all of my videos are free. If anyone asks me any questions, I'm always happy to make content for people, because it's just about making good stuff. When I send these to America, I lose £4. So, you know, I make the book because I want people to enjoy it. You know, all the books do is fund making the next book and the next book. It's just to share what Bartitsu is for people, because for me, it's a very valid and valuable art and piece of history. Yeah, as you said, people like to have things that they can culturally relate to, which is nice. And so that's an important angle. But also, I want to showcase that it has its place in a modern self-defense world. Yeah, I'm very aware of the kind of out-the-box style of modern combatives. They all look kind of the same stuff in a different leery color. You know, there's a lot of, you know, all their promo videos are the same, people wearing the same tactical cargo pants. You know, everyone's doing like, oh, we're doing the fence today, we're being all aggressive. You know, there's lots of samey stuff out there, and I wanted to show something that's different. There's inherent value in all of those other combative things, but I think it's become a swamp of sameness. There's also, I struggle with some of the areas of combatives that make me laugh. So a lot of things like de-escalation and talking. Like, you get people and they say, right, what we do here is we inoculate you to the fear of self-defense. And so you're at a leisure centre, and Gary, Barry and Dave, who you know are all accountants, are then pretending to be some hard-ass man-dem from Hackney in London. But they're not. And it doesn't matter how much they pretend to be, or how much they swear at you, or call you a cunt, or slap you with a pad. You're not scared of them because it's Barry, Gary and Dave. You know? So for me, if I want my guys to feel fear, I'll take them to a boxing gym where they don't know anybody and have them sparring, because that's an inoculation to real fear. Knowing that you're going to get slapped with some pads at a leisure centre and be called nasty names from Gary, it doesn't inoculate you to fear. And so I struggle with some of the methodologies of what is accepted as modern self-defense, because I feel there's too much amateur dramatic. As soon as you understand the sound theory of this is a fence and talking to de-escalate works, that's fine. But to over practice that doesn't really inoculate you, because the real fear isn't there. When people put on a bullet man, you know, there's use in that because you can clobber a person solidly, you can do what you like to it, but to over rely on that doesn't really give people, because you're not scared of the man in the bullet man costume. He's there to be battered. When he's got the knife, he's there to be battered. I also have a big issue with snarling in modern combatives. There's a lot of the instructors that will go, right, this is a knife defense, and they grab the knife and go, rah, 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 and they just snarl, and the poor bugger just cowers. You know, they fold. People don't fold in real life. A lot of the demonstrations, the seminars and the courses, there's that instructor fallacy of just immediately folding as soon as the technique happens. There's a really good drill, actually, that a karate instructor I like called Russ Jarmusty does. And he asks who's the most experienced guy in the room, you know, the biggest hardest bloke. And he'll give the weirdest bloke a plastic bottle, and he'll say, just get that bottle off the guy. He'll ask the biggest guy to get the bottle off the little guy. And it takes so long. It doesn't matter how big you are, how hard you are. If that young man wants to hold on to the bottle, he's got to hold on to the bottle. You know, things that demonstrate how resilient even the weakest human beings are. And I think modern combatives forgets how hard it is to take a human out the game. People talk about, most fights last 3 seconds or less. Those are ambushes. If you're getting punched by someone, because it's going to last 3 seconds or less if someone's hit you from behind. That's just is what it is. That's like saying defending against bullets. You know, you can't. This just happened. The event has happened. Unless you live in Inception, you're already unconscious. Yeah, but I think there's a lot of submission in modern combatives, which I like to take out of what I do in Bartitsu and expose people to more scarier sports environments, but always having the self-defense mindset. You've got to understand these things are different, but I think there is real visceral fear in getting hurt that isn't in play acting, and that's why I move away from that kind of stuff where I can. I'm going to get a lot of angry comments from that, but fine.
So many good points there, and the snarl cracked me up because I've got a terrible snarl. I've never been able to establish a good snarl, and it has limited my ability to teach reality-based self-defense. I can't get the good promo photos. I keep smiling at people. It's been a real hindrance. But
you find that the most successful combatives instructors out there 90% based on their snarl. So you got like Lee Morrison out there. He's got an award-winning snarl. You know, it's a snarl which begets the submission of his training partners. So, you know, unless you want to go up into a mountains and trail with a snarl master, I think, you know,
I'm pretty sure Lee was snarling in his wedding photos for that. I don't know though.
It's the same guys that always snarl when they're hitting the bag and they just sound like idiots. You know, like you get a guy who's like, like if anyone's hitting them, keeping their mouth open in my gym, I punch them in the face from behind because I'm horrible.
All right, very good, man. If people want to get a hold of the book, how do they get it?
So the best way, to be honest, is I crowdfunded it because I wrote it and I got it designed. So it's not by a publisher, it's by me, which means I can put whatever I like in it. And I like that. I like that ability because publishers will say, no one cares about fighting with a blackjack. Let's take that out, make the book slimmer. So I kept it in. So if you do want a copy of the book, the best way is to contact me personally via Facebook. And then essentially you can just PayPal me and I'll send it to you. I will put it on Amazon. But I wanted the people that adopted it early to have first hands on it. But I'll send you a link after the show. You can post it with this if people want to get in touch. But anyone can get in touch. I'm happy to send it anywhere in the world. It's the same postage everywhere. I just want a book that people enjoy and share and have fun with. I'd also say before you buy the book, go on my YouTube channel, get a feel for the stuff that I teach, because it may or may not be for you. So that's, you know, I put lots of long videos on there and you can get a feel for what I'm like as an instructor, whether you like it or not. And that's important because people enjoy different flavors of instructor. And I completely appreciate that my particular take on things will be different to many others. But there is a difference in what we do in Bartitsu, which you will not see in other arts because of the arts that Bartitsu is made from. They're from a different time, a different place. Same psychology, same reality-based mindset, but the tools are from a different time. So, you know, that's something for people to be aware of.
Yeah, perfect. Mate, thank you very much for making yourself available for this. You're going to stick around and do the bonus questions in a second, but we will have you back in the near future. I know you've got another book coming out on Defendu, on some combatives material. So once that's released, we'll have a chat about that as well, because there's again, another fascinating European historical martial art that deserves some attention. But for those that are leaving us here, thank you very much, Tommy Joe Moore.
Cheers.
Thank you once again to Tommy Joe Moore from the Bartitsu Lab for a really interesting conversation. If you want to hear over half an hour of additional content from Tommy Joe Moore, make sure you subscribe at our Patreon, which is patreon.com/managing violence. Sign up as a tribal council or tribal elder and you will get bonus content from this episode, as well as every previous episode from season 4 onwards. Really, really good value for $5 a month as a buy-in. Can't recommend it highly enough, but then again, I would say that, wouldn't I? All right, thank you very much for your time today. Make sure you check out our social media. We're on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. We're pretty much everywhere. If you're looking to connect with us and you can't figure out where we are, you're probably not trying hard enough. All right, on that point, thank you very much again, and I'll talk to you next time.